Hello and welcome. My name is Alyssa Lee. My pronouns are she or they, and I'm a candidate for ministry for the Unitarian Universalist faith. I'm also about to start a contract ministry position in Brookfield, Mass. But perhaps most pertinent to your interests, I was most recently the intern at the church in First Parish in Wayland with Reverend Dr. Stephanie May, who will soon be joining you all. So feel free to ask me questions You hear me? Okay, great. Our chalice of light this morning is from Jennifer Grayson. We come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods. Yet we are drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, who we are together, matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change this world.
A little bit of a technical issue, but if you will join me for the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our great covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Announcements. Obviously, we have coffee hour. We use the term coffee hour out of tradition. During summer, more people tend to go for the iced tea or lemonade or something of that sort, but it's coffee hour. On the porch, after the service, a free music event. Everyone loves free stuff. Landmarks Orchestra has a great program of performances on the Esplanade at the Hatch Bandshell, and it's free, open to everybody. And if you would like, there will be a group of FCB members and friends on August 2nd. Will be assembling here. Is that the idea, to meet here at what time? 6:15 and process to the Esplanade together. Feel free to bring a chair, a blanket, a picnic, or snacks, or you can rent a chair there for $5. Any questions, contact Janine, who's right here. And something new. It's hard to notice because they're on the floor where a carpet ought to be. These are samples of the new carpeting that we're planning to put in. And before you leave today, walk up, take a look at it, paw through it, tell us what you like or don't like about them. And any other announcements? Have I missed anything? Oh, great. Greater Boston Interfaith Organization is having what is this exactly? Cue me in.
It's just they are talking about what happened when they thought 800 people were going to come in, 13
Right.
showed up. And they wanted to just talk about the enthusiasm that was felt that night, and how do we capture that enthusiasm and bring it into the churches to make the people want to come to GBIO. So that's what it's about.
Wonderful. Is there an in-person meeting or is it Zoom only? It's a Zoom meeting. I assume the church will be sending out the link. Okay. Well, keep an eye on your email. It was the delegate assembly that John is referring to was a splendid event. If you don't know GBIO, it's a terrific organization. It lobbies for public interest, progressive causes, and this year it's affordable housing. They think through policy issues and come up with specific plans that can be put to the legislature that are thought out in detail. They're not just slogans. So if you haven't been following GBIO, our Social Justice Committee will be happy to include you in our mailings and all that. Anything else? Okay. It is time for our musical meditation. And now let us join in our responsive reading, number 598, Without Hate, from the Buddhist tradition, 598. May every creature abound in well-being and peace. May every living being, weak or strong, the long and the small, the short and the medium-sized, the mean and the great. May every living being, seen or unseen, those dwelling far off, those living nearby, those already born, those waiting to be born, may all attain inward peace. Let no one deceive another. Let no one despise another in any situation. Let no one, from antipathy or hatred, wish evil to anyone at all. Just as a mother, with her own life, protects her only child from hurt, so within yourself, foster a limitless concern for every living creature. Display a heart of boundless love for all the world in all its height and depth and broad extent. Love unrestrained, without hate or enmity. Then, as you stand or walk, sit or lie, until overcome by drowsiness, devote your mind entirely to this. It is known as living the life divine. Now I get to steal the microphone or borrow it for a few moments. For us, on behalf of all of us, our joys and concerns. Has anybody anything they would like to share with us of positive or negative affect in your life or in the world? I see a couple.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to tell you that we had the great pleasure last Sunday of being with our grandsons, Hunter and Tucker, who are both bouncy, lively children now after their tubes have been put in their ears, they're over all their infections, and they're now back to being their joyful young selves. So keep them in your hearts and minds. Thank you.
I would just like to offer a tribute to all of the many parishioners in our church who keep the place together.
And here is one of the above mentioned.
So I have a joy and concern. Joy, I'm back. So I had gotten COVID. I popped my cherry after 3+ years, sadly. So that's my joy, that I'm back and recovered. And then concern, my dad was recently diagnosed with cancer, so I'm going back next week to help caretake with him. So you can keep him in your hearts and prayers. Thank you.
And one from the music program. Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Karen. I've sung sometimes with the ensemble, and Bob and I have sung together, and glad to be here today. I actually am a little weary. I was on a late flight last night from Minnesota. My mother, who had Alzheimer's for 8 years, just passed away a couple weeks ago. So it was very bittersweet in the way that is. It was quite joyous. She was a church musician. She's Lutheran, but the service was full of music and joy, and we realized how nice it was when someone has disappeared like that, to be reminded of their humanity and what they brought to the world. It was really wonderful. So I'm a little worn out, but I wanted to really just say, I guess it's a combo, right? You know, joy. It's not even a concern. It's a joy and a thanks for, a great life, and I guess the opportunity to have shared it with her. Her name is Kathy.
As we call all of our memorial services here a celebration of life, and that's the way it should be. David has one.
I just suddenly had my revelation, and it kind of came to me, the idea of what does it mean for life or death. One of my favorite episodes of The Twilight Zone is when a person reappears from the dead and you say, but you're dead? Not really. As long as people talk about you, you're not really dead. As long as people say your name, you continue. Tony Bennett took his final bow this last week. His music will continue on, his body of work will continue on, long after his body is in the earth. So I just wanted to think about that and continue to realize that people do not die, they live in our memories. So on that point, to Tony Bennett, and he left his heart in the world.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Then one closing blanket pebble for all the concerns and joys that we carry in our hearts, spoken or not. And with that, I'll turn the microphone back to our guest.
Please join me in the spirit of prayer or meditation. Let's take a deep breath in and out. And another deep breath in and out. Our meditation today comes from Martha L. Munson. It starts with a quote by Wendell Berry. "For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free." In this time of meditation, may you rest in the grace of the world and be free. In weakness, may you sense the strength of the eternal hills and rest in the grace of the world. In failure, may you be upheld like the buoyancy of water and rest in the grace of the world. In limitation, may you remember that the choices may be as great as the expanse of the sky and rest in the grace of the world. In insecurity, may you feel the solid earth beneath your feet and rest in the grace of the world. In despair, may you hear the joy in birds singing and rest in the grace of the world. In fear, may you feel the warmth of the sun and rest in the grace of the world. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So be it. Our reading today is an excerpt from Bell Hooks' book, All About Love. Love is an action, a participatory emotion. Whether we are engaged in a process of self-love or of loving others, we must move beyond the realm of feeling to actualize love. This is why it is useful to see love as a practice. When we act, we need not feel inadequate or powerless. We can trust that there are concrete steps to take on love's path. We learn to communicate, to be still and listen to the needs of our hearts, and we learn to listen to others. We learn compassion by being willing to hear the pain as well as the joy of those we love. The path to love is not arduous or hidden, but we must choose to take the first step. If we do not know the way, there is always a loving spirit with an enlightened, opened mind able to show us how to take the path that leads to the heart of love, the path that lets us return to love. Please join us for the next hymn. It's number 100 in your gray hymnal, and we will just be singing verses 1 through 3. I've got Peace Like a River. Thank you for the beautiful music this morning. Last year, my husband and I took our then 6-year-old son to the American Heritage Museum, which is a military museum just outside of Hudson, Massachusetts, which is where I live. They have military memorabilia from World War I to the current day, and we thought that he would love seeing the tanks and the big trucks, but instead, as I'm sure many parents can relate, he had the exact opposite reaction to what we had anticipated. He was actually terrified by the entire experience. He clung to his dad and he asked to leave. And I realized that we'd never told him about war. He didn't know about the Holocaust or September 11th, which were all on display at this museum. His life had been perfectly sheltered from so much of the terrors growing up in this world can bring. And I struggled how to explain it all, especially as the reality of almost 100 years of human suffering was just there, right there on display. And it brought up a question for me. How do we explain to the children in our lives that though there is great love in this world, there is also suffering? That people can forget the humanity of others and sometimes themselves. After September 11th, Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers, briefly came out of retirement to speak to the children and parents of the world and reassure them. But even Mr. Rogers had no idea what to say in this moment of great suffering. He reportedly responded to his producer, "I just don't know what good these are going to do." He ultimately recorded 4 videos that aired on the 1-year anniversary of the attacks, and in one he reminded people that we are called to be tikkun olam, which is a concept in Judaism that stands for repairers of creation. Now, whenever there is a major tragedy, many people make reference to Mr. Rogers' famous advice to children. He said, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." But this advice was for children, not for adults. And while it can be of great comfort for children to look to the helpers so that they can see that the world is still made of people who will care for them and keep them safe, adults are called to something more. We are called to be the helpers, to look in the face of great tragedy and find the space to love people through the hurt, to let the lives we lead be a reflection of our internal values and to act from an ethic of love. In her book, All About Love, author Bell Hooks talks about living with this ethic of love. She stresses the importance of understanding love not just as a feeling that we have, but as a call to action. She harkens back to that idea of being repairers of creation. But we are repairing not only the world for ourselves, not only the world but ourselves, and it's through this ethic of love that we will find the healing. When faced with moments that we can't understand, or when we look into the face of senseless tragedy and can't recognize ourselves or where to turn, it can be difficult to find the hope, to understand where the love could be and how we can make sense of a world that contains such heartbreak. Quite a few people have told me that they feel hopeless right now. They look at climate change, senseless gun violence, the upcoming national elections, and the oppression of people of color and trans members of our communities, and feel overwhelmed and without any sense of what to do. In these moments, perhaps a turn to action, a recognition of our role as helpers, can be the guiding light for many of us. When I became a member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in my hometown of Oklahoma City and became deeply involved in community organizing work with the congregation, I was relieved to find a group of people who understood that no one had all the answers. And it was less about that anyway. but more about how we show up in the world and how we can sit in the questions. As Rainier Maria Rilke has said, life is about living the questions now, and through that process, perhaps slowly finding the answer. If heaven does exist, I will rejoice in its existence. But what is more important to me is that what we do with our time here on earth. How are we working to ensure paradise here and now? How are we putting the love and compassion we have for others into action? Is it enough merely to show empathy or to find a way to love other people? Or must we also put that love into action, to hold as paramount the work we do to ensure the safety, particularly of the most vulnerable of our society? I believe that there are two fundamental facets of putting love into action. First is to identify our empathy, and with that, recognize the humanity in everyone we encounter. Second, it is to do the internal work necessary to ensure we have the proper vision before acting. But sometimes this notion of contemplation before action can be difficult for many of us. I don't know about you, but my immediate response is always to just jump in and get involved. And I often get frustrated when I feel like people are maybe spending too much time talking and not doing enough. However, I was moved by a section in a biography of Reverend Howard Thurman, in which the author Paul Harvey recounts a story in which the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was stabbed and almost killed at one of his book signings in 1958. Reverend Thurman visited Dr. King in the hospital and encouraged him, as he encouraged many people, to look at this as an opportunity to take a brief step away from the everyday, focus on his life and meditate on its purpose, and then move forward. And this was at the core of Thurman's teachings, to take time to contemplate your inner life so that you may commune with God and later act with purpose. But it is also worth noting that Reverend Thurman recognized people have a duty to step back into life, pursue community, and take responsibility for the nature of the social order. Recognizing the powerful wisdom of Reverend Thurman, I still worry about an excessive amount of navel-gazing without action, particularly within our UU movement. In the book Radical Dharma, the Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams speaks to this idea that sometimes our spiritual paths in the Western world can get bogged down by focusing on the internal work of me, without also realizing there is a community piece as well. She stresses that internal liberation goes hand in hand with external liberation. It is important to find the balance between doing this work of internal liberation, but not losing sight of the ultimate reason for doing that work. A line that I find inspiring is from Bell Hooks, who said, "Love in action is always about service." She notes that being of service to others is a therapeutic practice as fruitful as any other. She adds, to begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this matter automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught that we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. It's end quote. And that, to me, is the core of how we take care of the most vulnerable in our society, as well as what we are called to teach the children amongst us. We teach them that love is an action that we choose to take, rather than always a feeling. We can choose to see the inherent worth and dignity in others, to quote our first UU principle, and we can choose how we manifest that sense of understanding into being. We can ask ourselves, how are our thoughts present in our actions? And how do we show, and do we show up in the world, and how we show up in that world, does that represent our values? Because we can read all the books and have all the discussion groups we want, but until we are using what we have learned to work toward the external liberation of those around us, our internal liberation will be inherently marred. What we do in our community and how we act toward others shapes our inner lives more than we sometimes believe or even recognize. How many times have you volunteered somewhere and came away from it learning more than you likely taught others? Have you gone to a community event or helped someone in need and felt a tiny piece of your soul was liberated in the process? I know that I have. Bell Hooks tells a story of when she was talking to a university audience, and she told them she had faith in the power of white people to speak out against racism, challenging and changing prejudice. She told them that she believes we can all change our minds and our actions. She believed this not because of some conviction and a utopian ideal, but because of the stories of many of the people throughout history who offered their lives in the service of justice and freedom. She got pushback on her assertions from the audience, who said the people she was talking about were exceptions, not the rule. And Hooks agreed. But she also said that we need to change our thinking so that we can see ourselves as being the one who changes rather than like those who refuse to change. She says that what was exceptional about those people was not that they were, as she said, smarter or kinder than their neighbors, but that they were willing to live the truth of their values. When we live our lives with a focus on fierce love and action that we can share with our families, friends, and communities, we decenter ourselves and our hang-ups and fears and inch ever closer to the beloved community that Dr. King spoke about so many decades ago. Hooks says, the choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. But this notion of living in love rather than fear is difficult. Personally, I'm living with a lot of fear right now, and I think many of us are. Certainly many people of color, trans people, and other members of our communities living with marginalized identities are living with a fear that I can't possibly understand. So when this fear threatens to overtake us, what can we do? The role we have to play in our own communities is unique and personal to every individual, but we can rest assured that it is needed, that we as UUs collectively are needed, and reminding ourselves and others that we are on the side of love is needed. Blessed be, and amen. And now for the care and sustenance of our community, we will gratefully receive the offering. There's a slight misprint in the order of service. We will not be singing hymn number 131. Before we extinguish the chalice, I just wanted to say thank you so much for welcoming me this morning. And I really appreciate the music, the beautiful music, the tech team, and Peter, thank you so much for making me feel welcome and showing me around this morning. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please join me and rise in body or spirit for closing hymn 121 in your gray hymnal, We'll Build a Land, which is one of my all-time favorites.